Catan! But in space now, for only 2 players. Is this even really Catan? We've run the gauntlet of playing every single Catan expansion. Let's play Catan? And then the normal Catan Starfarers, which had some questionable ships. So now there's this 2-player version of Catan Starfarers called Duel. To make Catan 2 players, in Starfarers Duel, you and a buddy are flying across the galaxy in your ships, buying and selling resources, upgrading your ship, and building colonies and trading posts. It's memorization, resource efficiency, and the dice rolling. It's 75 minutes for 2 players, and normal Catan is 60 minutes for 3 to 4 players. So yeah, this is definitely a little bit more complicated than normal Catan. If this smells familiar to the OG crowd, it looks like Starfarers Duel is about the same game as the 20-year-old Starship Catan. All I can tell at a glance is that the components are facelifted. Lastly, this copy of the game has been sent by Catan Studios, but they're not sponsoring this video. They haven't seen any of this footage. They don't have any input. Rather, the sponsor of today's video is Game Theory Tables. Game Theory Tables is coming out with a digital board game table. Wait, what? Yeah, this is the Arena, a literal digital board game table. It's a touchscreen commercial display that is a table you can play on. It has speakers and Bluetooth functionality too, like what the heck? Check out our link in the description below to go to the Arena's Kickstarter, which is live as of today. Also, the non-digital game tables are crowdfunding with savings up to 50% to take advantage of. That's a lot of money to save. Back to the video. How to play. So there's actually 5 scenarios in the game, but we're gonna be going over the complete game, which is scenario 5 here. So the goal is to get 10 victory points. As you take turns flying through space, that is 1 of 4 decks. Main ways to get points are building colonies, building trade posts, defeating pirates, and accomplishing objectives. On your turn, you first roll 1 die, and see if you or your opponent get anything from your colonies. That die roll gets added to your ship's booster strength, and that is your ship movement, aka how many cards you can flip over that round. So you pick a pile, then your opponent reveals cards one by one until your movement runs out. As you see each card, you can decide to do something on it if you can, or ignore it and keep flying. Example, there's this card, so I can buy or sell this resource. Spend money, get the resource. Reduce the resource, get money. You'll sometimes see colonies or trade posts, then you can discard the corresponding ship if you've built it to put that card in front of you. You keep exploring until you take 2 actions, that is, do something with the 2 cards that have been flipped over. Then shuffle all the revealed cards back to the deck they came from. Then you can build ship upgrades like boosters to fly further, or colonies or trading ships to later get cards in front of you. Then you can buy or sell resources one last time using any trading posts you may have acquired in front of you. Okay, fine, we gotta talk about objectives before we move on, which is another way to get points. So sometimes when you're exploring, you'll see a planet flip over. That means that you can do an objective for it if that is on the board, that is, if you can afford it. If you do, grab the objective, usually 1 VP. Okay, more on all the ways to get points later, but the moment someone gets 10 victory points, the game ends. That's it. Pros! Component pros time. And we remember how the original Catan Starfarers had components like this, which were quite nice. Well, this isn't that with a smaller box, but we do like what you've been given. Each ship is modular and looks cool. Lots of swag going on with the body lines here, and the pieces all fit together well. The dials for resources really do work well as you're moving them up and down, and all the cardboard pieces just feel sturdy. The 2 dice are really nice quality too. Love that little gradient look they got. And there are 3 thin boxes you assemble by folding them to help organize components. Oh, and the sector card structure is well done. This is great for when you flip a card. Oh, yep, immediately understand which resources they're talking about. None of them look remotely similar. And the arrows for buy or sell are really clear, really helps with the hype top deck moments. The components as a whole are just efficient with presenting info. Increasing or decreasing resources is dead simple with dials. The conveniently labeled on both side modules make a lot of sense, and the backs of buyable components have their cost. Also, all the art in this game is quite good. Shout out to the trading post looking quite unique. Then there's some nice art inside the box as well, and on the board. Now it's time for gameplay pros. First is that the main draw of this game, the memorization shtick, is quite crunchy and rewards paying attention. See, each of these decks is actually only 8 to 9 cards, and you're going through a third of the deck every turn as you roll a d6 that becomes a d3, and you add it onto your base movement. So after not too many rounds, you're gonna have a feeling of what's inside every single deck. You want to start memorizing the buy low, sell high cards. Oh my gosh, buy for 1, sell for 5 is insane. That is so surface level though, because you need to pay attention to, oh, where's that rare tech card to buy some? Oh, I need to buy some orange. What pile was that in again? If you want the objectives, well, what decks were those planets in again? There's only 1 planet with that name in the universe, right? So, okay, I see Andromeda. I should go for that later on in pile 1, after I explore the rest of the solar system to get those resources. Then 5 minutes later, you need to remember that the Andromeda is in pile 1. Wait, no, it's in pile 2? Or pile 1? I think it's in pile 2. Once you have that memorization going, you'll know, oh, sell for 2? Nope, because I know that a 4 sale is coming up somewhere. Okay, there we go, woohoo! Or, oh, I should really use this diplomatic outpost because I only have 1 more movement for 1 more card flip, and then of these 3 cards left, I only know there's 1 that helps me. The memorization gets layered with push your luck, since you can only do an action on a card you flip now. You can't go back to it later on the same turn. So there's a sense of gambling as you decide, I'm gonna go for the next one with my last movement point. Ah, shoot, it's the wrong resource. This memorization gets piled onto the dynamic and crunchy resource management. Winning Starfarers Duel is all about buy resources at a low cost, then sell to get money, as we just said, but then also using these resources and money to get objectives, or all the other ways to get points we'll get into. It's a consistently optimizable buy and sell loop where your ship is encountering so many trading opportunities, and as you've memorized cards, you have to think about what the value of your resources are. Maybe in early game, it's worth it to buy more orange, even for a high cost, because you can upgrade your ship. You can't forget about running out of money too, because you need it to buy things, so sometimes you might need to take some money generating turns so you don't actually drop to 0. You especially want to do this before pursuing an objective. But wait, what deck was good for buying and selling again? Ha ha ha, it's here. Buy for 1, sell for 5, baby. Oh yeah, that's the trade good we gotta talk about. See, it has the highest range of 1 to 5, meaning that it can provide the most profitable swings if you play around it. Selling it isn't very straightforward either, because since it's wild, you might want to save 1 to spend. Depends on how much money you have left. There's just so much the trade good can be utilized for, right? Like maybe you don't want to sell it and spend all 3 for an upgrade. This leads right into the next gameplay pro, which is how you customize your ship is a constantly updating puzzle. Going for boosters is great for getting more distance, but gosh, it's expensive and maybe you should spend more effort into getting colonies for guaranteed points. Then you have 4 different ship modules to upgrade from, since you start with 2 unlocked of your choosing. You choose whether to prioritize getting more storage for goods, or extra actions, or getting to look at the top of your Explore deck. All legit upgrades. Essentially, there's tons of valid ways to mix and match your ship, which changes as you see more cards in the middle, get different colonies or trading posts, and seeing what your opponent is doing. It's not like normal Catan where some upgrades are always good if you have a certain starting position. The amount of combinations in Starfarers Duel is nice. Maybe you want to scry the top of a Pirate Laden deck with this module, then you don't need as many boosters or pirates since you can put cards you don't like on the bottom. Or if you want to get a ton of boosters to flip more cards, maybe you should increase actions to use more of those card flips. If your opponent can repeatedly generate a resource you don't have, you can invest in this module to buy it off of them, and they can't say no. That leads us to the interaction, and Starfarers Duel is filled with it. On your opponent's turn, where they're flipping over the cards they're exploring, well, you need to pay attention to that because figuring out what's in this deck will later inform where you should explore. Like if you see a lot of trading outposts when they go through it, well then maybe if you're going for trading outposts, then you go there. Oh yeah, I remember they saw Andromeda and Perseus 2 turns ago. Okay, which deck did they go to again? I'm pretty sure it was this one, right? Plus, do you see these golden modules? These are the next level of the base modules, but there's only 1 of each in the game, which means that you really have to be on the lookout to get it before your opponent does. To add to the intensity, they're all worth a point. So it's not unsurprising to try to get them to just close out the game. More on this later, but once you get the hang of competing these, Starfarers Catan Duel becomes a tight, well under 75-minute game. Starfarers Duel has pretty much 0 downtime as you just have to pay attention. You're actually asked to look at your opponent's cards before flipping, just in case they get jumped by pirates and have to fight. So it almost feels kind of like blackjack where you're dealing for your opponent on their turn and you're hitting them as they keep exploring. Then as you're thinking about how to do the end of their turn, you pick up the cards and do the shuffling. It's also Catan, so you do look at the dice rolls at the beginning of every turn, so there's more things to look out for. The last gameplay pro is that the progression is good. See, each of these 4 decks is not static throughout the game because as you take cards out, say as you get a trading post, keep it for yourself, well then at the end of your turn, you take in a card from the reserve deck into there. And this deck is stacked in ascending order, which means that as you play, there's going to be tier 1 cards, then tier 2 cards, and tier 3 cards, then tier 4 cards you're going to start to see. It's also just satisfying to have the Catan-isms of having more stuff in front of you that triggers off of die rolls. It's easy to get a card to correspond for every single D3 dice roll. If you upgrade to the golden trade good module, well then you get wild 2/3 of the rolls. You can have a self-sufficient economy by producing via your colony and then selling the same via a trading post. Or just get a ton of this technology thing, then look to sell it at all these places. Here comes the money. As for replayability, what we've been talking about so far is the scenario 5 in this how to play booklet, so every single card gets used. And while openings might look a little bit similar to just going to one of these 4 piles with 36 cards initially to start these out that get shuffled in completely random order, well, yeah, the decks are gonna create different personalities with different games. We've had all different flavors of economy feeling decks to get money, or balanced decks, or decks that have a lot of pirates, or decks that are really good for getting objectives because they have a lot of planets. I mean, it's just literally how these cards are combined. It could be a lot of different combinations. The Sun and Moon faction are both worth trying out, with one specializing in boosters and the other in cannons. And there's a ton of variety in colonies, trading posts, and objectives. We'll talk about the rest of the scenarios later. Our last pro is that the theme meets the gameplay well. It really does feel like you're in this ship flying across space every turn. As you pick your deck, it's like a shipping route. Then you feel like a merchant constantly flying by planets with different goods, determining what the money value is in relation to your movement and actions left. Then anything can happen in space, as well-traveled shipping routes after colonies are established can have stronger pirates, or have more outlandish trading posts. Cons. Component cons time. And do you see this orange die, this D6 that we've been using throughout the review? Well, it turns out that this actually isn't supposed to be a normal D6. It's supposed to be a D3 in the shape of a D6. And we didn't know this until Catan Studios told us after we played the game many times. This wouldn't be nearly as bad of a concern if the fact that this was a D3 was said in any of the rulebooks, but nope. They always refer to it as an orange die. Great. Luckily, you can get a replacement for free, and when you buy the game now, there's a warning on the website. So we're not really factoring this too hard into scoring, but we have to bring it up to those who maybe didn't buy it through the official website. And for us, it's insanely frustrating to see as a reviewer. I just couldn't help chuckling at the comments that said, Klaus Teuber would never make this mistake. RIP Klaus. Oh, and we got 30 days free on Board Game Arena, so that was cool. Don't try to use this code though. Now for the rest of the cons, we're gonna talk about some of the art and card layout that is a little bit confusing. The colony and trade ships look really similar, so you have to defer to their tiny little symbol in the corner to tell what they really are. When playing, these basically look identical, which is annoying because the end result of a colony versus a trading post are way different. Oh, speaking of these trading posts, they also look quite similar to the normal planets you can trade on. Sure, there's a white symbol on the top right corner, but when this gets flipped from the deck, you're looking at the bottom of cards. Perhaps some different outline would work here, especially since the background is so similar. Then the resource cost on the back of boosters and cannons could be made bigger. Now let's get onto the cons of learning, because you got your rulebook, and then you got your training missions guide here. And so of course you'd start with the training missions guide, right? Learn to play the game in 5 scenarios. The problem is that this is just not good. It's clear that this was an afterthought just crammed in, with far less diagrams than the normal rulebook, where it refers to things via text, so you have to jump between it and the overview reference for components. Doesn't help that the special mission cards they refer to are only different in having tiny text on the bottom left corner of the back. Like seriously, why are you trying to blend in? There's even typos on the number of cards to put in, which isn't fun. The biggest loss this guide has is that it always explains setup as if you just played the mission right before it, where it simply says to add or subtract components, but never gives a full explanation or diagram of what's going on. Not only does this make it easy to fumble card quantities, but it also makes it agonizing to set up anything besides scenario 1 from scratch. And with each mission taking between 15 to 75 minutes, playing through the whole booklet in one sitting is pretty ridiculous of an ask, especially because the box only says 75-minute game time. So yeah, make each scenario possible to set up by itself. And that would actually lead to a huge benefit to the entire package of the game, where now you can easily tweak the complexity depending on your group's preferences. Know nothing about board games? Maybe just go with 1. Do you want almost all the complexity but don't like fighting pirates? Go with 4. Although this would require a lot of components to be modified, because currently the Sun player is stronger than the Moon player in every scenario except for scenario 5. That's because scenarios 1 through 4 don't use the pirates, which is the only thing cannons are good against, which the Moon player excels at. But I guess if you're playing really casually, you won't mind this too much. The second change would actually for there to be 1 less scenario. See, they're making you play an entire game in each scenario, and only sometimes adding one mechanic in between scenarios, so this could be condensed. To make learning more efficient, we would combine scenario 2 and 3 together to save about 20 minutes, since the jump from 2 to 3 is pretty minimal. Then you would have scenario 1 be the baby step, and then the next scenario is 30 minutes. And then once you finish that, you're on scenario 4, and the game is complex enough to be its own game as is. Okay, now on to gameplay cons, and we're gonna start with some slight concerns about balance. There's these trade stations with some clear imbalance. If someone happens to get some of these earlier, they're just gonna do better. This diplomat one to trade anything for value 3 at the end of your turn is incredible flexibility. Or how about literally getting trade goods? Like, what? This is strictly way better than the normal ones because you're guaranteed trade goods at the end of your turn. Remember, you can do these as many times as you want at the end of each of your turns, unless it says so. Then we notice that this module to get tech is actually weaker than the same cost module to get a trade good. This tech creation one could be a bit cheaper or just make it cost different resources at least. Next gameplay con is the pirate mechanic. See, we haven't explained this much yet, so to quickly explain, it's when you're exploring and then you are about to flip and see a card, and then your opponent goes, oh, would you like to pay off the pirates? If you do pay them off, no worries, just keep flying, pay your 3 money. If you don't, then you're gonna have to fight them. This means you roll a die, and then add it to your cannon quantity, and then you compare it to the pirate's strength, which is a die roll, plus their whatever cannon quantity. You win ties. The problem we have with this mechanic is that it feels like a feast or famine result. If you beat the pirates, you get a free good, so you take a trade good, duh, then you keep flying without an action spent. That's pretty good. But if you lose, not only do you have to end your flight, but later on in the game, sometimes the pirates blow up a cannon, a booster, or a module. It's not unsurprising to be in a situation where fighting is mandatory, since 3 is a decent chunk of change, and more pirates get randomly added to decks as you play the game. It's just mad crippling to flip this over as your first card, then lose your entire turn, or even worse, lose a booster to see less cards on every turn after. This gets compounded by Hero of the People, which is getting 1 victory point by doing 3 special things, like certain objectives, and beating pirates. But beating pirates is kind of outside your control. You don't really know how strong pirates are gonna be. It's pretty safe to say that if in early game, your opponent happens to win against 2 pirates and you lose against 2, it's gonna be hard to win. We get what they're trying to do with pirates, to add some sort of risk to these decks, but the idea of losing your entire movement off of a die roll and then maybe blowing up more stuff just doesn't feel worth the upside. A possible way to make them less swingy is that if you beat them, you don't get a trade good, and when you lose against them, maybe you just pay some money instead of losing your entire turn. The last gameplay con is that the pacing of this reserve deck actually feels a bit off if you play optimal. See, this reserve deck is split into tiers of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Where you get to all the tier 2s after the tier 1 is completed. We quickly realized that a consistent way to get points is actually to grab your golden ship modules, since those are permanent upgrades with consistent costs that you can get without an action, since they happen during the building phase, and you can build as many things as you want to turn. So if you get half of the total available golden modules, that's already 3 points. Combine that with getting some objectives, some colonies, and one of the milestone achievements, and you're pretty close to 10 points. In our games, we rarely saw tier 3 cards during gameplay, if ever. I would assume that when they were testing this, they found that they would hit tier 3s on average, and then the tier 4s are kind of a just in case, but I would just decrease the size of tier 1 and tier 2 reserve piles for faster progression. Now we have something that's not a component or gameplay con, but rather just a con of how the game is designed. See, after every turn when you flip over all the cards, well, then you gotta put them back in here and shuffle it back in. So that means at the end of every single turn, you're shuffling every single turn. That kind of adds up. It can get a little bit tedious. Again, inherent to the design of flipping cards over and then shuffling them back in. I mean, maybe you can make the deck smaller or in the simpler scenarios. In the simpler scenarios, this doesn't feel as bad because there's gonna be less cards in every deck. Now we get to it, the last con. This has a little bit to do with the theme, where the text in the front of the rulebook isn't shown in this game. It talks about how this game's premise is that how when your ship gets damaged, you encounter 4 alien races that are willing to help you. Then explains each of them. Okay, but as the wise man might have asked, where are the aliens? Because I don't see them. There's no aliens in this game. The only reason I have an idea of what they're talking about is because I played normal Starfarers Catan, where those aliens were homies you could recruit to your side. In Starfarers Duel, nope, those guys aren't here. I don't see the art. The closest thing we have to it are their trading outposts. Those just look kind of alien without saying what faction they're from. Why didn't they just use the Starfarers Catan alien art here? Somewhere. They could have put it somewhere at least. Scoring! Now it's time for a recommender score on Catan Starfarers Duel, where we try to critically evaluate the game with the aforementioned listed pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And this is a memory plus push your luck plus resource efficiency game with some Catan-isms, so yeah, pretty cool idea. So this is gonna get a 6 out of 10. It is above average, but barely above average. It was almost lower, but this game is still shelf size certified to us. At MSRP of 35 bucks for these components and presentation, heck yeah. In today's crowdfunding landscape, I was expecting this to be at least 40 bucks MSRP. But yeah, gameplay wise, this isn't gonna be winning any awards for balance, but that's not a huge deal because it's a game targeted at a casual audience. Likely for those familiar with Catan and wants a 2-player version, that's maybe a little bit more complicated. But then the learning is egregiously bad. And so while we don't punish this game very hard for balance or lack of aliens, we really smack it for learning. Games like these really contribute to the idea that all board games are hard to learn. So newcomers just stay with Catan. Let's go back to the end of this learning book with scenario 5. This full game actually feels a little bit odd to us. We couldn't escape the feeling that adding in the pirates, with also the 75 minutes, with all the ways to customize your ship, with all the memorization for bigger decks is maybe too much for your targeted Catan fan. On one hand, you're taking this slightly more casual idea of deck memorization, rolling dice at the beginning of your turn, then adding in these pirates which have the possibility to randomly appear and destroy parts of your ships, and there's so many ways to get points. You're encouraged to constantly buy and sell with the tons of trading posts in front of you every round, which is all surprisingly crunchy for a game where scenarios were initially flip one card, buy thing. So let's break down the scenarios to see if any of these currently appeal to you. Scenario 1 is a very basic push your luck as you buy resources low and then sell them high. Scenarios 2 and 3 are still a little bit light as they introduce colonies and building, which are things that would make a lot of sense to you if you've played Catan. But scenario 4 and 5, oh, this is now a medium weight game, where determining how to out-trade outpost your opponent, beat them in module upgrades, and compete over glory points is a lot more thinking. Then each deck jumps from a handful of cards to 7+, which makes memorization much harder. It's really up to you to determine when the deck size gets too big or the non-exploring stuff gets too complicated to see what mode is best for you. Quick tangent on how colonies are treated too, seeing as you've likely played Catan, where the equivalent is settlements. In Starfarers Duel, it's almost like you don't get to choose which colonies you invest in because they're just card flips from the deck. And more often than not, they're good to grab if you can because they're a literal point that you're taking away from your opponent getting, and you're only playing to 10 points. So don't expect being able to optimize your resource generation more specifically like in normal Catan. If you like this combination of memory and microeconomics and are willing to learn the game beforehand without going through the training missions, then this could be a cool 2-player game night for the more seasoned board gamer getting their newcomer board game buddy into a more complicated game. Maybe this is a zero downtime date night too. You can do the internal math of buying low and selling high. Try to mind game your date about what deck the card they're looking for is in, and there's just enough Catan-isms that they'll have to say yes to playing, right? If you're both not the most experienced in games, you could just still truck through this, go through scenarios 1 through 3 in one sitting, and then put it aside because doing this all in one sitting is ridiculous. You could even just stay on scenario 3. Scenario 3 is a perfectly valid way to enjoy the game, and then to balance out the sun faction being a little bit stronger than the moon, just give some more money to one player. I couldn't forget the base Starfarers Catan that we didn't like as much, and possibly that's why the pirates are thrown into this game, and we're concerned that the people that played Starfarers and didn't like the casualness missed out on Starfarers Duel, because Duel has much more of a crunchy draw. But then if you like Starfarers Catan for the casualness, then jump into Starfarers Duel Scenario 5, it's a little bit more hardcore with all the upgrades while constantly memorizing cards, so it could be too much for you. Oh gosh, where was Andromeda again? Ah gosh. Anyways, Catan Starfarers Duel blows normal Catan Starfarers out of the water in being a much better product, but this could have been so much better. And we think that in future printings, there's a lot of upside in this. And as we get to our personal scores now, let's start with our newest member of Shelfside.
Hey guys, it's me, Adam. I'm a Shelfside guy now. Don't ask where Daniel is. Before I give my personal score, I just want to do a quick overview of what types of games and mechanics I like and dislike, so y'all know where I'm coming from. I really like doing funny combos in card games like Dominion. I like games with a sense of progression, 4X games like TI4 with POK really hit the spot for that. I also enjoy praying to RNGesus to get funny, outcomes and stuff like Wonderland's War, where you're literally just gambling. The main things I dislike in games are unnecessary complexity and false advertising. Complexity can come in a variety of forms, like having way too many need-to-know terms and roles, or smushing a bunch of crazy mechanics that don't gel well together. One example of this is John Company, which is a little too wacky for me to enjoy. I think the bureaucracy that comes with the 10 plus roles prevents me from understanding what's actually going on. It's very thematic, I'll give it that, but it feels like it hinders my enjoyment more so than it immerses me in the game. In contrast, 4Xs like TI4 with POK or Civilization, which are still pretty complex, still allow me to sort of get the gist of the current situation while I'm playing, even if there's a lot of complicated stuff going on. False advertising is hopefully a little more self-explanatory, but basically, if I go into a game expecting one thing and I get a completely different experience, I'm usually not a fan. I like to know what I'm getting into before I play something, and during as well. A prime example of this was Catan Starfarers. I went into that game expecting just regular Catan, but in space. But it ended up feeling completely different. I started out playing it like a regular Catan game, but realized that was just not the way to go. I ended up winning by just getting some wacky ability that let me teleport across the entire map, which was funny, but it wasn't that fun. Thanks for listening to my spiel. Now on to my personal score for Catan Starfarers Duel. I'm going to give this game a 6 out of 10. My very first experience with this game was negative. Ashton had already played through Scenario 1 with another friend, so he recommended like, oh, it's pretty easy. Just, go ahead and play Scenario 2 with the friend while I'm doing something else. And when I tried to read the rule book for Scenario 2, I did not have the willpower or energy to finish reading. And I feel like that says a lot since I've been reading rulebooks and writing the how to play scripts for the most recent shelf-side plays. So I feel like I'm fairly forgiving when it comes to rulebook clarity, and they're not going to be perfect, but there was something about the Starfarers Duel rulebook that just did not click with me. And then I came over a different day to play through Catan Starfarers Duel with Ashton, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. We started with Scenario 1, which I think was really the key. It was a lot more digestible, and it's the only scenario with a proper setup explanation. As we started playing, scenarios 1 through 3 really scratched the itch for that sense of progression that I really enjoy. These felt like a perfect blend of memorization and mechanical progression. Each new mechanic that was introduced felt like it naturally built off of the last one. Genuinely excited to get to the next scenario to see what's the game gonna introduce next? And honestly, if this game was the first 3 scenarios, it would have been an 8 out of 10 for me. Quick side note, and Ashton touched on this a bit already, we did play the game wrong at first, but it's not our fault. And I think if we had played the early scenarios correctly, it would have been a bit slower paced and less memorization heavy, because we wouldn't be kind of rushing through the deck with our higher numbered dice rolls. And I actually really enjoyed the snappiness of those early scenarios where you were trying to kind of discover what's in each deck and then memorize like, okay, this is sort of where I need to go to get this objective or this type of resource. If we played it correctly, I think slowing that down would actually hurt the score for the early scenario. When we got to Scenario 5, that was really sort of what tanked my enjoyment. First off, Scenario 5 brings back pirates from the base game, which are not funny RNG, they're just annoying RNG. This scenario also feels like it brought a pretty drastic gameplay and meta shift. You no longer really had to interact with the shared objective cards that you had been doing, or that you had been interacting with in all of the earlier scenarios because of pirates and modules. So yeah, this really spoiled my experience of the game, and it didn't really feel like what I expected the game to build up to. That sort of had that false advertising vibe for me. So that's why I'm gonna give Catan Starfarers Duel a 6 out of 10. Each successive scenario feels like it's building up to something really great, and then it botches the landing at the end.
My personal score for Catan Starfarers Duel is gonna be a 6 out of 10, above average. What a roller coaster this review has been with this die being incorrect. But as we back up, first I was insanely curious because I thought of normal Catan Starfarers that we reviewed and thought, well, this version has to be better than that pirate randomness and warp teleporting, right? And the first 3 scenarios actually blew me away. It's like, wow, they actually managed to get a cool push your luck 2-player game that still has some Catan-isms with a genuine space theme. Like flip over high sell, bam, just Empty your trade goods to get 15 Astro. That feels really good. It's a dopamine hit. Flip over a low sell. It's like Black Friday. Buy 3 of those for 1 each. But just like Adumb, in scenarios 4 and 5, I was a little bit more uncertain about how I felt as the game introduced a little too many aspects. See, Starfarers Duel isn't that complicated compared to many games we play here. But when I'm playing, I feel like there's a weird disconnect of going autopilot while also having to worry about so many things. Autopilot as in I'm rolling a die every turn, get resources, and then picking one of the 4 piles, and then as it flips over, I just say yes or no to each card. But then in scenarios 4 and especially 5, now these trade outposts to do some resource manipulation, and then you have to compete over the golden trade modules to get points. And I really struggle to memorize the thicker decks. No kidding. Once these decks hit 8+ cards, there was this breaking point where I just forgot what was in the decks. Like I just lost semblance of where all the planets were. It was terrible. In both late games of scenario 5, I was upset with myself as I knew where I massively misplayed in buys and missing out using my trade outposts, which raised my respect for the decision space, but then I was again perplexed on why they chose to stack so many extraneous things on top of the memorization. Some final criticisms of the full game. In a game that is about an hour, I find always going through piles of cards a little bit repetitive. I would have liked another option besides that to make exploring feel more special. Then I don't like shuffling every single turn. Too much work. Upon reflection, I would gladly play scenario 7 again. I think that one is like 7 out of 10 for me. Like that is actually something I'd bring out on date night. Yeah, I think so. I think it's because the memorization doesn't feel too bloated with each deck being smaller and the game length is well under an hour, which feels like a very good time. I give it a 6 out of 10 to give a more accurate representation of the full game, but when I look back on Starfarers Duel, I'm remembering the good stuff about it, and how much better it is than normal Catan Starfarers. Again, this being sent to us did not affect scoring, and as always, thank you to our patrons for making videos like this possible. We got you guys right here, and yeah, this is an interesting game for sure. I was very curious checking this out, and I think my curiosity definitely, my result met my expectations and how unique it was. I think Catan's always an interesting one to review. We also got our Mad Lads of Cardboard right here, and that's it for the video. Yeah, we got Adumb coming in, so that's cool. Yeah, I hope you guys liked his personal score. We all rated a 6 out of 10, so that's pretty interesting. Anyways, let me know what you think of this game. More Catan games to review in the future. I'll see you guys later or next time. All right, yeah. Bye-bye.